Agradecemos al señor alcalde por su interesante presentación y ahora invitamos al señor Neil Payton, director de Authority Dallas Plus Partner, quien nos hablará sobre Transit Direct Orient Development. El señor Payton es director de Authority Dallas Plus Partner, donde creó y dirige la oficina de la costa oeste en el centro de Los Ángeles y lideriza los esfuerzos de la oficina en el diseño de edificios residenciales y de uso mixto en lugares urbanos y urbanizados, y en el desarrollo de reurbanización de barriadas y centros urbanos. Trabajando también a través de escalas, los temas comunes en todos sus esfuerzos son conectividad a las redes de tránsito, un enfoque en el urbanismo caminable, relleno, la participación pública en el proceso de diseño y la inextricabilidad del diseño urbano con el desarrollo económico. Ha sido un líder en sitios de desarrollo orientado al tránsito en todo el país, transformando estacionamientos de superficie de nuevas estaciones de tránsito en barrios vitales. Con ustedes, el señor Payton.
Gracias. Buenos días. That's it for my Spanish. It is great to be here in Panama. It was exciting to listen to the mayor just now talk about all the things that you're all doing here to prepare for and to realize the potential of the transit system that you're building and to realize its potential by creating great streets to walk and great places to be. I want to also just add a comment to Roberta's opening comments. I have to say this, that we do have a person leading our country who said some weird things, but I live in California, and where by itself is the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world, where we are leading the nation in the United States in sustainable efforts, and where we have a governor, Jerry Brown, who believes that this is of vital importance, not only for the world, but actually for the state's economy as well. So, just to let you know that. Okay. Let's see, how do I, where's the, oh, this. Oh, okay. So I want to talk about transit-oriented development, TOD. I don't want to talk about the transit. I want to talk about the development that goes around the stations, and specifically to talk about what we call the 4 Ds of transit-oriented development, which luckily also translate as 4 Ds in Spanish as well: density, diversity, design, and destination. And the reason I want to talk about this, and the sort of takeaway from this, which is why this is important, because transit is important, but it's a tool to get around. What we're talking about is what goes on at the stations, and this is how we sell it in the US. We sell it because not only is it more sustainable, but it's also healthier. You live longer. It creates economic vitality. And it results in less deaths from traffic. These are things that are easy for politicians to sell. So let's talk about what these 4 Ds are. The 4 Ds and let's talk first about density, which you might say is related to not only how much stuff there is, how much building mass there is, but also how many intersections there are, interestingly enough. Whoops. So when we talk about density, one of the reasons, sorry, all right. Having a little bit of an issue. Okay. We're talking about having enough people to make the station viable, to get people walking around, but also enough people to make a city viable. To get density, you don't have to do tall buildings. You can do tall buildings, but you don't have to. Paris has a density of around 1,500 people per hectare and is a obviously very walkable, transit-friendly place. We're doing something similar in the United States, where we have, this is a brand new building that we designed outside of Washington, D.C., roughly 1,500 units or people per hectare. And as you can see, the goal is to create a building that frames the street. Doesn't stand out as an icon, it actually tries to blend in. Another example in Washington, D.C. of the same. There's a subway running right underneath this building. So in each case, what we've tried to do is establish a base, right? A frame for the urban realm that actually encloses the space of the street and makes the pedestrian feel comfortable. So even with this example of a tall building, notice there's a base, and that base the edge of that base is not a parking garage. In this case, it's retail. It could be housing. It's a way of establishing a scale for the pedestrian. Just other examples of that. And whether or not that's happening in the case of the earlier one, Canada, or in this case, Dubai, humans are humans, right? We actually operate at a scale that is consistent across cultures. We humans are built for walking. We evolved as walkers. They say that early male humans walk about 15 kilometers a day. Early female humans walked about 9 to 10 kilometers a day. So that's how we are built. And in order to make our walking a pleasurable experience, it's not enough to have some place to walk to, like a transit stop. We have to actually make the walk comfortable, particularly if you're in an environment that's really hot or really cold, right? And they make walkable environments in hot cities, and they make them in cold cities. But the buildings do respond to those conditions. Oops. Oh, I think I said this one already. I'm going back. Oh, God. Okay. So let me talk about that, the human walking. One of the earliest observations that we have about humans is that their civilizations tended to be based on a walkable dimension of 400 meters from center to edge. And that condition has been with us since we started making urbanism. It's about 5 minutes to walk that distance. Now, one of the observations made by people in the transit business is that people will walk about 2 of these to a transit station that's high quality, or let's say 10 minutes, or about 800 meters from center to edge. That, we often say, is the pedestrian shed of a transit station, right? Now, interestingly enough, and you could sort of see how this is relevant here. Yesterday, David Rodriguez took me on a walking tour of Casco Viejo, which of course is a fantastic place, and you could learn everything you need to know about making a great city in that 5-minute area. And honestly, everything about making a contemporary city. It's completely 100% relevant today. So Casco Viejo is actually tiny. It's even smaller than the 400-meter radius, but then looking at the kind of larger historic center area, you can see it pretty much corresponds to that set of radii. So when you think about master planning at the level of transit-oriented development, you think about putting these together. It's like a set of fried eggs, just with a line connecting them, and then maybe some bus lines, bus routes, or bike trails connecting the other way. Right, so here we are, for some reason that shows up again. Wow. Sorry. Wow, what is this? I don't, it's like, back and forth. Is it going forward? Yeah, thanks. Okay, just keep going. It's sort of, okay, up, go back. Strange things here. One of the ways in which you get the density, of course, in the United States is you have to have parking. Unfortunately, that's still a reality. So what we try to do in order to create a street and a neighborhood with enough density that supports that walking framework is to hide the parking. Even if it's not underground, which we can't always afford, we wrap the parking with something else. So you can see here, a project we're finishing up in San Francisco for affordable housing has a parking garage embedded in it, but you can't ever see that parking. And so these units you see in the front here, these housing apartments, they're in a sense backing up to a parking garage. If you have a tall building, we do the same thing. We just stick a tower on top of the garage, right? But you can't see the parking. Now, why is that important? Because humans don't live in parking garages. They park their cars there, and it is very difficult to walk down the street lined with parking with cars, even if they're in a nice building, if there isn't anything activating the front. The ability to see humans, to see people, is what makes a walk enjoyable. Let's see what happens next. Okay. The other thing I talked about was in density is not just how many people there are per hectare, but how many intersections there are, in this case per square kilometer. It turns out that one of the things that's necessary for a walkable environment is that there be a lot of a very fine weave of streets. And there's a reason for that. It's because it allows every street to carry a little bit of traffic and no one street to have to carry all the traffic. And so when we look at great cities around the world, we understand that that's how they're constructed. We did a study of American cities to look at some of the ones that are highly desirable. This happens to be Palo Alto, California on the right, just the grid. Palo Alto is one of the most successful small towns in America. And it has an intersection density of 230 intersections per square kilometer. Again, you need around 77 to make it good, so you can see it does very well. Here's the Casco Viejo area. It does 420 square kilometers, intersections per square kilometer. That's almost double what Palo Alto is, and Palo Alto is pretty good. So Casco Viejo is very good, right? And that's another lesson we can learn from that neighborhood. And this is the simple reason why. With a very coarse grid, as you see in the upper left, the streets have to carry a lot of traffic. In the lower left, you can see the streets, because there are more of them, carry much less. Each one can be narrower, right, carry less traffic, and be more pleasant to walk on. So not only does that promote walkability, but it actually reduces traffic fatalities. And what we've learned in a study in California was that studying different smaller cities in California is that in a finely grained network, that is more intersections per square kilometer, you get less driving, more walking, more biking, more transit use, and 1/3 of the traffic fatalities. They actually don't have less traffic accidents, it's just less people die in them. Now, that's a very compelling statistic to politicians, because they like to say that they're helping to save lives. A second of the components of transit-oriented development is diversity. You need a lot of different things to make it a pleasant place to walk around. Because every transit station, it's not just a place to get on the train. It's a place to make diverse communities. And in my opinion, even if you never, ever, ever get on the train and you live in a transit-oriented development, you'll benefit, even if you don't ride the train. So diversity is a part of it. Now, when we say diversity, what do we mean? Well, certainly a mix of uses. Housing, retail, shopping, places to work. This is one of our projects in Washington, D.C. that was an empty lot with a new transit station. Another one, a new retail pedestrian street. But also a mix of building types. I showed you something like this earlier, but notice how this street is, this is not our project, this is in Vancouver, Canada. Notice how this street is composed of both high-rises and low-rises that are fit together. Now you can do that easily enough if the scale of the high-rise is such that it has a base that makes them work together. And notice how the base comes to the ground. You feel comfortable as a pedestrian walking down those streets. Or another example we're doing in Dubai. Sometimes it's a mix of housing types or unit types, even in the same building. A project in Washington, D.C. we did sits on a main street, but also backs up to a secondary residential street around a transit station. You can see in this cross-section of the building that across the street, on the left-hand side of the slide, there were existing 2-story and 3-story homes. So we made units facing those that looked the same, and then stepped the building up to the more major street. This was a way to incorporate these buildings into the existing fabric and make it seem a little bit more unified. And here you can see two sides of that building. It doesn't look like one building, it actually looks like 3 buildings. And that's okay, because what we're trying to do is make a city here, not just an individual building. And the important part of this is if you're a designer or a developer working on one building, then you're, in a sense, a constituent. You're part of this larger whole. If you're a planner or an elected official or a government official, you're looking at how all these parts go together. So whichever side of that coin you're on, these are important ideas. Design. Now, what do I mean by design? I don't mean that things are pretty or they look good. That's nice, but that's not what's going to make a great environment. I can show you a lot of cities with unbelievably great buildings or pretty buildings that aren't necessarily great cities. I'm talking about design that supports the pedestrian. And this is something that I can talk to elected officials and developers a lot, because there's a value proposition here. Walkable environments in the United States in particular, we know this actually in North America in general, perform better economically. They get higher rents per square meter in office buildings. They get higher rents in retail. They get higher rents and sales prices in apartments. Okay? They create wealth. They create economic vitality. Because at some point, everyone is a pedestrian, even if you drive. Eventually, you get out of the car. And so what that public realm is, what the space looks like, feels like when you walk down the street, becomes important. And that's made of 2 things, the sidewalk and the street and the building face. So here is a pretty horrible street in a small town near San Diego. built for the car. Well, what we wanted to explain is, here's where the government works, right? They design and build that space. Here's where the private sector works. They design and build that building edge. The two have to be thought about at the same time. That's what makes a walkable environment. But one of the other things that's important here is not just those two constituents, but it's the increment. So one of the things I noticed when walking around Casco Viejo yesterday was that, buildings were built over time, and some are wider than others and some are narrower, because obviously some people bought multiple lots, some people only had one lot, but there was an increment. So as you walk down the street, there's a kind of rhythm to the building vertically. So here's a contemporary building that we designed in D.C., Washington, D.C., and you can see there's still a rhythm. Even though it's big, there's a rhythm of bay windows and of storefronts that allow you to measure your progress as a pedestrian, as a human. And you've done that here as well. This building in Casco Viejo, which I think is astoundingly beautiful, has almost all the lessons you need to make good urban buildings in Panama. It's a great scale. It's got 7 stories. It's got this bay system. It's got these windows that allow you to come to the edge. It has a great ground floor that engages the pedestrian. You could make a city out of this. And you could use contemporary details, but the structure of it is all there. We did something like it. It's the opposite maybe, but this is also in Washington, D.C. It's actually the building you're looking at, which looks like 2 buildings, is really one building, again, made to look like 2, ground floor, retail, and the like. We wanted to show, this is Los Angeles, we wanted to show what the implications of even building a transit station might be. Even when we don't restructure the streets, just the importance of doing buildings that support that pedestrian network. So this is an existing area of Los Angeles, and this little coffee shop on the corner is protected, it's historic, so we have to save it. We wanted people to be able to visualize how you could remake a street with just one building at the transit station when it gets built. So this is the infill. Every building matters to making a pedestrian-friendly environment. And a pedestrian-friendly environment is critical in making transit systems work well and into realizing the benefits of transit-oriented development in reduced greenhouse gases, healthier environments, less traffic fatalities, and the like. At the public level, you might talk about it as making complete streets, which is where you're thinking of streets not just for the car, but for everyone who uses it. Pedestrians, bicyclists, even the folks who pick up the trash. I really was touched by the mayor's slides of some of these street improvements that you've all been working on in the last couple of years here. Because that attention to detail and the pride that the mayor showed in that attention to detail was a very compelling thing to see. Importantly, the sidewalks have to be in proportion to the streets. Sometimes people say, well, what's a good size for a sidewalk? And I would say, well, what size of the street is it? Because look, this is Paris, this is the Champs-Élysées, and the sidewalk is like, about 20 meters wide. Of course, the street is 11 to 12 lanes of traffic, but you don't even notice it because the sidewalk is so big that it's almost its own plaza in itself. So what we did was we were working in the town of Santa Monica, California, and they had sidewalks of all different widths, and we wanted to show folks what the difference between a sidewalk with mat was, that we couldn't just say, here's how wide a sidewalk ought to be. It really depends on what you want to have happen in the sidewalk, right? So here's a little study we did. Here's a typical 3.6 meter sidewalk. And this happens if you have 4.9, you get a little cafe, just small. At 8, you get, whoops, went really fast. I don't know if it'll go back. Okay. For some reason, it's doing its other thing. Can you go forward? Yeah. Okay. Well, you got it, right? Different widths allow different activities to take place. And the intersections matter. This is an intersection we've been designing in Honolulu. Doesn't look like you'd expect Honolulu to look. Same issue. Let's see if I can go forward. What happens? I might just need some help to stay there. Yeah. Okay. So what if we start to rethink that intersection? Again, widen the street. Yeah. Maybe add a little bulb out or parklet. Next. Rebuild the last corner. So that all matters. The intersections matter as well. Not every intersection has to be like that. This is back in Santa Monica. This is at the end of one of the most iconic shopping streets in America, and yet it's pretty deadly. 2 blocks from this intersection is the Pacific Ocean, but you'd never know it. Right? So we again wanted to look at what happens if we take a lane of traffic out. Next. We call this a road diet. Less room for the cars, more room for the pedestrians. Right? Okay, next. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was to prove up this idea that walkable environments matter. And we did a study of startup companies in the Los Angeles region. And we did a study of the Westwood area where UCLA is, Pasadena where Caltech is, downtown, which is downtown, and then Santa Monica, which has none of those. And the most startups are in Santa Monica, the one on the upper left, because it's the most walkable environment of all of them. Next. Or Arlington, Virginia, where they built a subway 30 years ago, and now you can see the benefits of what's happening. Washington, D.C. is in the distance. They allowed the existing residential density to remain. Next. But they built up the center. And in 40 years, they created 3.7 million square meters of new developments. And they reduced traffic. Next. The density in some cases remained the same, but in some cases increased. Next. But the result is they were able to get something like 73% of the folks walking to transit. Now that's a win. So, wow, it's sort of a little fast. Yeah. We tried to apply that go forward. Tried to apply that concept again in Los Angeles as we planned a new line there. And these were all the proposed stations. Next. So we wanted to understand how each one of those stations might be conceived. Because even though I talk about 4 Ds of transit-oriented development, the proportion of each differs from one to another depending on the context. Some are bigger, some are smaller. And so we developed this typology of station areas, next, and then tried to apply them to each. So it's not enough time to go through that, but it's a concept that you might want to consider as you build out some of these station areas in Panama. Next. So just another little case study. This was an area in Washington, D.C. that, as you can see, looked pretty horrible in 1999, called Columbia Heights, built around a transit station. Next. And this is what transit allowed you to do after a citizen engagement process. Next. Infill those dirt lots, but in a way that supported walkable environment. Next. The model of what was to be built. Next. And what was built. That building you see there on the dark brick building there, that's brand new. Brand new. Right? These are buildings we did that we sometimes do contemporary buildings, sometimes we do traditional buildings, but what we really care about is what it feels like to be a pedestrian as you walk by them. another area of the DC area called Crystal City, where we encountered an existing condition developed in the 1960s, and our task next was to see how we could build it out for 2050 by filling some of it in next. And so we went from 2.5 million square meters of development next to a neighborhood of 4 million in the same area, just filling it out and making it more walkable next. You can see the difference in building footprints next. And just the detail of it. There's some selective demolition, and there's selective filling in next. Creating public spaces, creating more usable sidewalks next. Creating places out of what were traffic islands next. Okay. And then the last view, looking down toward this essentially freeway and turning it back into a boulevard next. Next. Okay. Another project we're doing is a shopping mall outside of Denver, where the shopping mall got torn down. Next. You see the on the upper left, upper is what was there and what we're proposing on the bottom. The shopping mall was torn down because it was dead. It had died. There are a lot of dead malls in the United States, and thank God they're dead. Thank you. It was out of control, that machine. Thank you. What was there? What we did when we contemplated the site, before we contemplated it, our design, we looked at what might be comparable. So we took blocks of people knew. In this case, this is downtown Denver, and using the magic of Google Earth, we cut and pasted those pictures in the site. So we could say, oh, look, this is downtown Denver applied to our site. So we can understand the scale of things. So then when we designed the site, we actually created a street grid that could be fit back in to the site. So what was a mall becomes part of a city. And a place. And this is what we talk about when we talk about destination, the fourth D. The idea of going somewhere, of being somewhere, of making this place a little different than the next place. That's all. And this is the last little project I want to show you. This again is in Honolulu. And it seemed to me somewhat relevant to what you face here. You can see in the distance our site. Well, maybe you can't see it. You'll see it in a second. See that? See the little spot we're working on? They're building a transit system in Honolulu, and it's still under construction. But so we worked on this little site here, at really about 1 block from a transit station, and it's a public housing site at present. This is what it is today. It's bad. It's about 350 housing units that are really horrible. And our goal was to replace it with 2,500 housing units and retail. And by the way, everyone who lives here will be able to return. But a whole lot of other people will live here too. Some of whom are paying full rent, some of whom are subsidized. It will be mixed income, mixed use, mixed building type. So you see on the bottom is the existing model. Whoops. And here's the site again. And here's our plan for the site. Now, if you remember, I talk about filling in blocks. So we looked at various blocks in Honolulu and did the same thing and found that the most desirable neighborhood is a little small block area known as Chinatown. And we used that block structure to replace the blocks here to make it seamless. Rather than a project that was walled in, we wanted to make something that would be completely open and transparent so that anybody would just be part of the street network. So you see how that works. There are existing parks that we wanted to connect to with a small park in the middle, but using the existing infrastructure as part of our idea. The goal when this is finished is that it's somewhat seamless with the surroundings. There's a careful thought about every street. This is a major street that already exists. How do you front it? You can see on the left-hand side, there's a high-rise building there, but it's set back some, and there's a 5-story base that allows this to sit and frame the street for the pedestrian. Some of the smaller streets that we've designed as well, and even one that is small, that is pedestrian only. The scale keeps reducing of the buildings as the scale of the streets reduce. So there's a different set of types of streets. So here's the view of what it is. You can see the transit station as it's proposed in the foreground and what it will become. But importantly, there are many high-rises here, but they are sitting on bases, and the garages are wrapped with housing. So even though there are 3,000 parking spaces here, most of which are in above-ground garages, you won't see any of them. I mean, from the air you can see them, but not from the ground. And that's what the primary corner will be. And a view of the main space looking to an iconic valley that was historically important in the Hawaiian culture. And so that's my talk for today. And by the way, I have to do this as a plug. If you're at all interested in our work, we have a book. And you can buy it at Amazon. And there it is. So thank you very much.